In this video, we're going to walk through a brand new deployment of Cloud Block Store from the ground up. We do have a detailed deployment guide that provides steps to deploying Cloud Block Store as well. Throughout this demo video, I'll be referencing the Cloud Block Store deployment guide as well as the Cloud Block Store support matrix, so keep them handy if you want to follow along. Both documents are available at these URLs. You can also search for these docs using your favorite search engine. As you can see here, I can simply Google for the Cloud Block Store deployment guide and it's the first hit that shows up. Likewise, I can search for the Cloud Block Store support matrix, which also shows up as the first hit. Before we deploy Cloud Block Store, we want to make sure that all the prerequisites are in place. In this demo, we're going to include a brand new setup that includes a fresh new VPC. In this new VPC, we'll want to make sure that there's both a private and public subnet. This is a requirement for Cloud Block Store because we want to ensure that all the security best practices are followed. Therefore, Cloud Block Store will be deployed in a private subnet. Cloud Block Store will also need access to the internet to enable call home features, alerts, and Peer 1 management. So we'll need to have a public subnet to allow that internet access. In order to get internet access, the easiest way is to deploy a NAT gateway. And to deploy a NAT gateway, we'll need an elastic IP address. The next thing we want to ensure is that we have connections to the appropriate VPC endpoints, specifically for S3 and DynamoDB. VPC endpoints ensure that traffic between Cloud Block Store and these AWS services will stay within the AWS network. We'll also want to make sure that we have the security groups available with the rules to allow the appropriate traffic to flow. In our demo, we'll go ahead and create a security group for each of the iSCSI, management, and replication ports that Cloud Block Store will use. In terms of permissions, we've seen many customers have hiccups due to the fact that they don't have the appropriate permissions in their AWS account when they try to deploy Cloud Block Store. This is quite common, so we've made it a requirement to have a designated AWS IAM role with the appropriate elevated permissions that can be used only to deploy Cloud Block Store. This way, a user with limited permissions does not need to have elevated permissions directly. They can simply assume the IAM role, which grants them the temporary elevated permissions only for the actions pertaining to the Cloud Block Store deployment. You'll also need to have an existing EC2 key pair. Most, if not all, customers already have an EC2 key pair, but I thought I'd mention it here just for completeness. Lastly, you'll need a Cloud Block Store license key. In order to get the license key, you'll need to purchase a subscription either through the AWS Marketplace or work with your Pure Storage and Partners Accounts team to obtain a license. All right, let's get started. The first thing we'll do is use the VPC wizard to create a new VPC. The nice thing about this is that we can check off items 1, 2, and 3 in one single flow using the wizard. The wizard will allow you to create the private and public subnet, enable internet access using a NAT gateway, and create the VPC endpoints for you as well. Let's take a look. So I'm at my AWS Management Console. What I'm going to do is go to Services and go to VPC. And what I can do is click on the Launch VPC Wizard, but before I do that, I'm going to click on Elastic IPs to make sure I have a free Elastic IP available. If I don't have one here, I can allocate a new one, but it looks like I have one free, so let's go back to my VPC dashboard, and we'll click on Launch New VPC. And here you have some options. What we're going to do is choose the public and private subnet. We'll go ahead and click Select, and here we're going to input some of the parameters for our VPC. For the parameters of my VPC, I'll probably leave most of the items at default, but I will change a few things like the names. So for example, I'll change this to my VPC as the name of my VPC. For the subnets of my private and public subnet, I'll just keep those as default. I will go ahead and just change the name of the private public subnet. I'll just add a my to that just so I know that I created this. Notice for the availability zone field, for the public subnet, the preferred AZ is not a big deal. You can choose whatever AZ you prefer. However, for the private subnet, this is where your Cloud Block Store instance will reside. Therefore, we want to make sure the EC2 compute instances used by Cloud Block Store are available in your preferred AZ. In this case, we're in Ohio, and I know all of the AZs in Ohio currently do support all of the EC2 compute instances. You can view the EC2 compute instances used by Cloud Block Store in the support matrix. So if we go to the Cloud Block Store support matrix, we can scroll down and there's an actual table here that describes the various Cloud Block Store models that are offered. There's a V10 here and a V20. They basically differ in terms of capacity sizes and performance. And within each model, there are the various instances that are used to create the Cloud Block Store instance, right? So there's two C5N 9x larges for the V10, and there's also two C5N 18x larges if you want to deploy a V20. There are also these underlying i3 instances as well that are deployed, right? But what we really want to make sure is that these C5N 9x larges and C5N 18x larges are available in your preferred AZ for your region. So if we scroll down a little bit more, you'll see that in the supported regions, if you look at, for example, Ohio, which is what we're doing in this demo, Ohio is supported as a region and there's no asterisks here. So all the AZs are supported. But if you look at North Virginia, it does have an asterisk and it does say that these regions with these asterisks are generally supported. However, there are some availability zones in these regions that do not have the required C5N 9x larges and the C5N 18x larges for Cloud Block Store. So that means you should check with AWS support and just create a ticket and ask them which AZs support the C5N 9x large and the C5N 18x larges for your specific region that you want to deploy. So going back to our example here, I'm in Ohio and I know that all the AZs are supported, so I'm not going to choose a preference. But if you are in a region like say North Virginia that does have only certain AZs supported, you do want to choose that preference here so that you ensure the deployment will be successful. And again, just go ahead and create a ticket with AWS and find out which of those AZs for your region supports those C5N instances. Okay, now that we have that out of the way, let's move on to the next section, which is the NAT gateway. Down here is where I can add a NAT gateway. So in order to add a NAT gateway, we'll need an elastic IP available, which is why we checked it earlier before we got into the wizard. So if I click on this, I see that there is an elastic IP available, so I'll select that. And then I can also add an endpoint. So if you recall, we do need endpoints for DynamoDB and S3. So we selected that here. It says DynamoDB, so we'll keep it at that. And then we'll go down, add another endpoint, and we'll select it for S3. And we'll scroll down. We'll leave all the default parameters as is. And that's about it. We'll go ahead and say create VPC. It'll take a few minutes to create, but when it's done, what you'll see is this screen that says successfully created. So if I click on my VPCs, I will see that there is my VPC that I just created. I can also go down to subnets, and then I can see my private subnet and my public subnet. So if I click on each one of the subnets, I can also look at the route table. So I can see that my private subnet has a route where all the local traffic stays local. Anything bound for the internet will go to the NAT gateway. And then if I click on my public subnet, anything local will stay local. Anything bound for the internet will go to the internet gateway. So that means traffic from my private subnet will go to the NAT gateway, which is actually sitting in the public subnet. And then anything from there will go out to the internet gateway. So I do have a route from my Cloud Block Store, which will be in my private subnet, to the internet. Okay, and then also we can take a look at the VPC endpoints. And those are the endpoints that were created, one for S3 and then one for DynamoDB. All right. So now the next thing we're going to do is go ahead and create those security groups that we want for our ports for Cloud Block Store. Before we go in and create those security groups, here's a table of the security groups that we'll need. The first one, which is a system security group, will be created for you, but you go ahead and need to create the replication, iSCSI, and management security groups manually. So we'll go ahead and do that. There's the inbound and outbound ports listed there for you. Let's go ahead and take a look. All right, so we're back at our VPC console. We're going to go down and select security groups so we can view that. There's a default security group, but we're going to go ahead and create our own. So let's click on Create Security Group. And here we'll create 3 of them. So the first one will be, we'll call it iSCSI for Cloud Block Store. All right, and then we'll just pretty much copy and paste that onto the other ones as well. So let's do the same as the description. We'll select the VPC, which is the my VPC we created earlier. We'll say create. All right, that's one. We'll do 2 more. And instead of iSCSI, we'll call this replication. And we'll select the same VPC, create. And then lastly, we'll create the management one. And we will also select the same VPC. So now we'll have 3 security groups that we've created. Next thing to do is to set the policies or the inbound and outbound traffic for them. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to select the replication security group, click on inbound rules, add a rule, and I'm going to edit this to say 8117. And then I'm going to choose the IP or IP ranges for the other array's replication port. So if you are going to replicate, you want to make sure the IP addresses are allowed here. So in my case, I'm going to use the 172 IP range. And then I'm going to set the description here, and I'll call it replication. We'll save the rule. Once it is successful, we'll go ahead and create a outbound rule. So we'll go ahead and select the replication group again, set the outbound rules here, and we'll go in and change the traffic type to a custom TCP rule. Once again, we'll set it to 8117 for the port. And as for the IP ranges of the destination, we'll set the 172 IP address range. Again, this is the IP address of the destination array's replication port. And then lastly, we'll set the description, and we'll call it replication, and save it. Next, we will set the management port rules. So let's go ahead and do the inbound ones first. First one we'll do is add a rule, which is port 22. We'll set the source to my 10.0 IP address range, allowing anything in 10.0 to connect and manage this. And then we'll set the port 80 next. We'll do the same exact IP address range. Then we'll also do port 443. And then lastly, we will set port 8084. Next, we're going to set an outbound rule for the management port, and we'll set it to port 443. For the destination IP addresses, I'm going to leave it wide open, but you can lock it down if you want. Keep in mind, if you do want to replicate to another array, the management ports between the other arrays or between the Cloud Block Store instances do need to be able to communicate, so you might want to ensure that the IPs can see each other. Next, we're going to add a inbound rule for our iSCSI port, and we'll go ahead and do port 3260, and the source will keep it at the 10.0 range for things in our VPC, and go ahead and save it. Now let's take a look at our list. You see that we've completed items 1 through 4. Next thing on the list is to do the roles. So let's go ahead and create that role. So back to my AWS console, we'll go to services, we'll go to the search bar and search for IAM, and that'll take us to the IAM service. And from here, first we'll start off with creating a policy and setting permissions for that policy. So we'll go ahead and say create policy. We'll go to the JSON file and we'll enter a whole policy using a JSON file. So if you don't know what to set, what we can do is go to the deployment guide and it has all the permissions for you. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to open up a tab and we'll search for Cloud Block Store Deployment Guide. There it is. We'll click on the guide. And from the guide, it gives you all the prereqs that are needed for Cloud Block Store, and it shows some of the items that we've done already in this video. But there's also an appendix. We can see that the JSON file is provided with all the permissions. So what we can just do is simply copy and paste. Going back to the console, we'll just replace everything with that file. And then we'll review policy. We'll give it a name. We'll call it Purity Service Permissions. We'll just give it the same name for the description. You can put in whatever you like. And you see all the permissions are there. We'll go ahead and create the policy. Okay, so now that the policy has been created, we'll go ahead and create a role. It's going to be an AWS service. And now we'll select the CloudFormation as the service that will use this role. Click Next on Permission. We'll use that permission that we just created earlier. So we're going to look for the Purity policy. So that is the Purity Service Permissions. And then we'll go Review. We'll create a role for this. It's going to be called Purity Service Role. And then we'll go ahead and create the role. And that's it. The role has been created. We can now use the role for deployment. Next on our list is the EC2 key pair. So most customers already have this, but we're going to create it anyways just for the sake of completeness. So back on our AWS console, we'll go to Services, we'll go to EC2, and from EC2, we'll select key pairs. And there's a few here already, but we'll create a new one. We'll call this CBS key create, and it'll allow us to save the file. We'll say OK. And now we'll have our key, and we can select that when we deploy. So now let's take a look at our list. The last item on the list is the Cloud Block Store license key, and to get that, you can get it through the AWS Marketplace, or you can work with the Pure Storage account team and partners. Okay, great. So we are now ready to deploy. So if you look here, we're at our AWS Management Console. What we'll do is to go open up another tab to deploy Cloud Block Store. And when we open up another tab, we'll simply go to the AWS Marketplace. So I'm going to type in Google, AWS Marketplace. And once I go to the Marketplace, we'll do a quick search for Cloud Block Store. And you'll see there's two listings here. So there's one listing that shows product deployment. The other listing is to actually get the license. So if you want to get the license from the AWS Marketplace, you can click on here. Again, you can also work directly with Pure Storage or Pure Storage partners. But in this case, we're going to assume we have a license already. So we're going to go directly to the product deployment. And here I am. I'm simply going to click on Continue to Subscribe. I'm going to click on Continue again. And at this point, I can go down here and select my region. I'm going to select Ohio because this is where my new VPC was. Go ahead and click Launch. And then it's going to take me directly to this page where I can actually launch from a CloudFormation. So I'll click Launch. And here in my CloudFormation service, the YAML file is provided already, so it's already populated for you. All you have to do is click Next, and the YAML file does provide the configuration of Cloud Block Store. So now we'll get to this page where you can enter details of your Cloud Block Store instance, starting with the name of the stack. I'm going to call it CBS Demo for short. And then there's going to be the name of my array or my Cloud Block Store instance. So it's called an array name. I'm going to keep it the same name, CBS Demo. And then down here, I'm going to enter my domain, so my company domain. So it's going to be purestorage.com. I can select the instance type. There's two kinds, there's V10 and the V20. So I'm going to select the V10, which is the lower of the two models. So here's where we enter the license key. I'm just going to enter some dummy key, but you'll be entering your real key once you have that. And the rest here are the parameters that will be selected for the Cloud Block Store instance. We'll start with the key names. So this is the EC2 key we created. So we created CBS key. You can use whatever key you want. Now we'll be selecting the subnets for our various Ethernet ports. You can put them all in the same subnet, or you can separate them out to different subnets, right? So first of all, there's a system subnet. So the system subnet, we're going to put them all into the same private subnet. And there's a replication subnet. Again, I'm going to select the same private subnet. Again, you can separate them out if you want, but in our case, we'll keep them simple and put it into the same private subnet. And then there's the management subnet. And the last remaining three items are the security groups. So remember, we created those security groups earlier on, so we'll just simply select those. So for security group, this is for the replication one. I'll select the replication security group. This one's for the iSCSI one, so I'll select the iSCSI security group. And this last one is for management, so I'll select the management security group. And then the rest of it is just internal use only, so you don't have to fill that out. We'll just go down and say next. And you can put some tags in here if you want. In our case, we'll just leave it blank. And the last item is that permission, or the role that will have the permissions to deploy Cloud Block Store. So we will select the one we created. It was called Purity Service Role. And then we'll scroll down and say next. And scroll all the way down. Acknowledge and create the stack. And that is it. We will wait for progress to complete, and then we will have a Cloud Block Store. As you're waiting, feel free to go ahead and refresh this with the refresh button. What that'll do is give you all the events that have occurred to create the Cloud Block Store instance. It'll take about 10 minutes to complete the whole deployment, so why don't we come back when this is done. Okay, so here we are. It completed successfully. You can see all the various events that have occurred in between the time that it started and ended. And then if you also click on the outputs, you can see the endpoints or the IP addresses that you can use to manage Cloud Block Store, to replicate Cloud Block Store, and to connect to Cloud Block Store over iSCSI. Now let's also take a look at what was deployed with Cloud Block Store. So if we click on Services and go to my EC2 console, we can see that you'll have a few additional EC2 computes that are now running in your environment. So you'll notice in this case, we will have 9 EC2 computes, and these are all the various components that make up Cloud Block Store. You'll see that there are 2 controllers and 7 virtual drives. You don't have to do anything here, but I just wanted to point it out so you can see the underlying components. So now that we have the Cloud Block Store instance up and running, let's go ahead and log in. So we'll go back to the CloudFormation console and look for those IPs that we had. Those were the management IPs. So if we go back here and we look at the outputs again, remember you have all the IPs right here in front of you. So you have the GUI endpoint here. So let's go ahead and highlight that. And we'll log into it from one of our EC2 consoles. So I will go into an EC2 that I have already. And I'll log into one of my EC2 servers here. So which is this one right here. So we'll go in. We'll open up a new browser. And we'll copy paste the IP of the management. And we'll log in. So now we have our GUI. I'm going to expand this here. So this is the same exact GUI and dashboard that you will see on your physical flash array. So everything you are used to on the physical flash array will work the same exact way here on the Cloud Block Store instance. We're going to go ahead and go through some exercises of creating a host, creating a volume, connecting the volume to that host. For the full best practices, go ahead and look at our deployment guide. It'll provide all the additional best practices to ensure that availability and all the appropriate connections are made. But for our sake, we're going to go ahead and keep it simple. So let's go ahead and click on storage. And we'll go ahead and click on host. And we'll create a new host. We'll call that Windows Server. We'll say create. And in this Windows Server, we'll go ahead and add a host port to it so we can connect to it via iSCSI. So click on configure IQNs, And we'll enter the IQN value here. To get that IQN, we'll go to our host that we're going to use, which is this one right here. We'll type in iSCSI and click on the iSCSI initiator. And then we'll get the IQN value of this host, and we'll enter it right in here. Add. Okay, so we have our host created. Let's go ahead and click on volumes and create a new volume. So we'll click on the add button and type in my CBS volume. And then we'll give it a size of 1 terabyte and say create. So we have our volume, we have our host. Now let's go ahead and connect this volume to that host. So we clicked on the volume. We'll now connect it to our Windows host and say connect. So now from Cloud Block Storage's point of view, it will connect that volume to that host, but we'll also have to make sure that the host can connect to the Cloud Block Store instance as well. So to do that, we'll go to the settings. And this is just typical iSCSI basics, but we'll go into networking and we'll click on one of these iSCSI IPs and copy paste that. And then in here, we'll go to targets, paste it and do a quick connect and say done. So now it's connected. So we can just basically go into disk management and there's our volume. Put it online and initialize it just like you would any other volume to your host. And if you want to add more volumes, you simply go back to storage and click on the volumes and add more volumes. Just click on the plus sign and give it a name. ICBS volume 2. This time let's create 2 terabytes. Click on the second volume and connect it to same host. Then we'll go back to disk management and rescan. And there you have it, your second volume. And do the same exact thing you did before, bring it online, and you're good to go. Now keep in mind, this is a quick, simple demo. For the full best practices, refer to the deployment and best practices guide to ensure you have all the connections between the host and the controllers for redundancy. This concludes our demo. Thanks for watching. Hopefully it was helpful to show you how to deploy Cloud Block Store from beginning to end. See you again soon.